Kathy?
Sure, so I get the privilege of defining emotional intelligence. David, you did a fine job earlier. I'll highlight your structure and then also share an example of how it was very relevant. So before I even do that, for those of you who are really not buying this whole emotional intelligence thing, I'm going to do neuroscience. So before I do that, I'm also to say that emotional intelligence is often described as EI as often as it's described as EQ. So those of you who have heard EQ compared to IQ, also EI, just a little nomenclature change. So back to the neuroscience. Neuroscientists have discovered that when we are triggered by an emotion, particularly a negative emotion or an anxiety, what often happens is we have what's called an amygdala hijack. And the amygdala is a little part of our brain. It's the lizard brain that sits kind of in the back of our heads. And it was, it constantly is standing for danger. It was an incredibly important part of our brain during development because it's what made us survive in the fang and claw world that our ancestors lived in. Now, we have gotten out of the fang and claw world, but our biology has not developed to lose this amygdala, which is constantly scanning for danger, and it's an important part of our survival. Unfortunately, it can be a really destructive part of driving behavior. So what happens during an amygdala hijack is you feel an emotion. Let's use fear as an example. The amygdala then takes the blood out of the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functions reside. We have adrenaline and cortisol that pumps through our bodies, and the blood rushes to our extremities, and we get prepared for fight or flight. Also, it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. But that's what happens biologically in our bodies. And the emotional intelligence framework helps us re-engage with our executive function so that we actually take action that gets the results that we want and not action that meets our emotional needs. So the example I'll use is one of my first clients. He's an entrepreneur out in California, and he called me and said, Kathy, I don't know what's going on. I'm so frustrated. I've just replaced the 7th person on my team out of 7 in the past year, and I want to grow this business and sell it in 5 years, and if I can't build any sort of sustainable team and institutional knowledge, I'm not going to get the return on my investment that I'm making, and I don't know what to do about it. Can you help? And I said, well, tell me what's going on. What did you discover when you found out why people were leaving? And he said, well, I talked to HR and they said that I'm unapproachable and I'm kind of a bully and I'm loud and I don't know. And do you think that has something to do with it? So we engaged in a formal coaching relationship, and we actually, it was the most beautiful use of emotional intelligence I've ever had, because we first started with the first tenet of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and he didn't know what was happening when he got triggered. So we talked about identifying what his triggers were, so that once he knew that he was triggered, it was an invitation to choose to self-manage. So in an old world, when he got triggered, he'd come into someone's office and yell and scream, or he'd bang out that email, send, and then the next day he would wake up and realize, that probably wasn't very helpful, because that's not really helping me get the results I want. It's scaring people and making people want to leave. So it started with self-awareness, it moved into self-management, and then we spent quite a bit of time on empathy. This was a hard part for him, the social awareness, trying to understand how other people can see the situation, because in his world, he was an innocent lamb in his story. And in every other person's world, they were innocent lambs, but all he saw was right and wrong and good or bad. And he was always right and always good. Everyone else was by definition wrong and bad. So as we worked on developing his ability to see a particular situation through multiple lenses, he developed a much richer ability to lead, which fundamentally takes us to the fourth tenet of emotional intelligence, which is relationship management. And so about 4 months into the engagement, he flew me out to California, and we had different agendas. His agenda was to have me interview his staff so he could find out how far he'd come. My agenda was to figure out how far he had to go. And what was really delightful was in the course of every single interview, every single person said, I don't know what's going on.